It was upon a particularly murky November evening that I found myself once again at Baker Street, where the ever-burning fire and Holmes's sharp presence offered a welcome refuge from London's clinging fog. My friend was, as usual, perched upon his chair, long fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes half closed as if the world itself were no more than a puzzle waiting to be unlocked. "You come from the Strand," he murmured without opening his eyes, "and stopped not 10 minutes ago at the bookseller's on the corner of Fleet Street. I trust you found the military memoir satisfactory?" I could not suppress a laugh at this seemingly supernatural perception, though I had long since learned the futility of astonishment. "Your powers never cease to amaze me, Holmes." "You are quite correct. Though how you came by the knowledge I cannot fathom." Holmes allowed a thin smile to play upon his lips. "The ink smudge on your cuff is peculiar to the bookseller's wrappings. Add to this the faint scent of the tobacco, which the fellow insists upon smoking behind his counter. Surely even you detected it, and the matter admits of no difficulty." Our familiar banter was interrupted by a firm knock at the door, followed almost instantly by the entrance of Mrs. Hudson, who bore upon her countenance a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. "A gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she said, handing me a visiting card. The name inscribed thereon was one I had encountered in the society columns: Sir Reginald Harrington, a man of considerable fortune and influence, noted as much for his political ambitions as for his eccentricities. He entered a moment later, tall, cloaked against the damp night, his features obscured by the dim light. Yet as he removed his hat and scarf, I perceived at once that his expression bore a most unsettling peculiarity, a shifting quality, as though two countenances warred for dominance upon a single visage. Holmes rose, his keen eyes fastening upon our guest. "Pray be seated, Sir Reginald. What grave matter brings you through this fog to Baker Street?" The baronet lowered himself into the chair, his hands trembling slightly as he spoke. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice low and urgent, "I come to you with a matter that defies comprehension. There are witnesses, several of them respectable folk, who swear they saw me in 2 different places at once, and at times I can scarcely deny it myself. For within the last fortnight, crimes of the most dastardly sort have been committed in my name, while I was elsewhere, in the company of unimpeachable witnesses." Watson though I felt a chill run down my spine at these words, and even Holmes's usually impassive features betrayed the faintest spark of interest. "A man with 2 faces," Holmes said softly, almost to himself. "Now that is indeed a puzzle worthy of our attention." Holmes leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he studied Sir Reginald with that penetrating gaze which so often left men unsettled. The fire crackled in the grate, its glow throwing restless shadows across the walls, and I could not help but feel that the atmosphere of Baker Street had shifted into one of tense anticipation. "You speak of crimes committed in your name," Holmes said at length, his tone deliberate, "yet you assert that you were elsewhere when these deeds occurred. I must ask for clarity, what precisely has transpired, and in what form do these accusations present themselves?" Sir Reginald drew a long breath, his gloved hands tightening upon the arms of his chair. "2 nights past, a gentleman of high standing, Lord Hensworth, was assaulted in his own chambers. The intruder gained entrance by guile, and though he was masked, his stature, voice and manner were declared to be mine by both Hensworth and his butler. They swore upon oath it was I who demanded papers of a most confidential nature, and that when thwarted, I struck Lord Hensworth before fleeing. Yet at that very hour I was dining with the Bishop of St. Albans and 2 others of unimpeachable reputation. Watson though I felt a sudden pang of sympathy for the man, for the distress etched upon his face was genuine. Holmes, however, betrayed no such sentiment. He rose, paced slowly across the carpet, and then turned sharply. "And last night?" Holmes asked, the words clipped, almost impatient. Sir Reginald's lips quivered. "Last night was worse. A lady, an acquaintance of my family, Miss Eleanor Vance, was accosted on her return from the opera. The scoundrel who confronted her bore not merely my form, but spoke to her by name, alluding to conversations only I could have held with her. She insists it was I who threatened to expose certain private matters unless she submitted to his demands. Yet I was not in the vicinity of Covent Garden at all. I was engaged with a solicitor at my own home, preparing papers of estate." "Curious," Holmes murmured. "Very curious. A man who duplicates not only your appearance, but your very knowledge of intimate affairs. This is no ordinary impersonation, Sir Reginald. He crossed his long arms, eyes fixed keenly upon the baronet. And these witnesses, both Lord Hensworth and Miss Vance, speak with certainty. Unshakable certainty, replied the baronet bitterly. Their testimony, coupled with my supposed presence, is enough to blacken my name. Were it not for the strength of my alibis, I should already stand accused. At this, Holmes gave a short, humourless laugh. Alibis, my dear sir, are but frail barriers against the weight of repeated testimony. Scotland Yard will not hesitate to prefer charges should this impostor continue his work. It is fortunate indeed you came to me before such an outcome. He paused, then turned abruptly toward me. Watson, you see at once the singularity of the affair. An impostor not merely resembling, but inhabiting, so to speak, the identity of another, repeating his manner, his tone, his most private knowledge. The thing demands the closest scrutiny. I nodded, though my mind was troubled by the uncanny nature of the baronet's tale. But Holmes, I ventured, surely even the most clever rogue could not replicate so precisely a man's intimate dealings. The knowledge of conversations, of private matters, these bespeak more than mere resemblance. Precisely, Holmes replied, a gleam of satisfaction in his eye. Which is why we must not concern ourselves overmuch with outward appearance at present. Let us consider motive. Sir Reginald, who profits by your discrediting? Who stands to gain should your name be dragged into ruin? The baronet shifted uneasily. There are rivals, of course. My ventures in Parliament have made enemies. My investments in certain industrial concerns have likewise provoked resentment. Yet none, to my knowledge, would stoop to so elaborate a scheme. Holmes regarded him closely, then resumed his seat, tapping his long fingers upon the armrest. Enemies are a common commodity among men of influence. What interests me more is opportunity. This impostor is furnished not only with your likeness, but with knowledge that must come from within your circle. There lies the crux. At this suggestion, Sir Reginald's features hardened, and he cast his eyes to the carpet. For a moment he was silent, and I fancied I saw a flicker of guilt, or was it fear, pass across his countenance. Holmes pounced upon it at once. Come, sir, there is something you withhold. You must understand, frankness is indispensable. Half-confidences are the bane of my work. If we are to prevent this villain from further soiling your reputation, you must conceal nothing. The baronet's lips tightened, then parted with reluctant resignation. Very well, Mr. Holmes. There is a man who once served as my secretary, a fellow named Charles Redgrave. I dismissed him under unpleasant circumstances some months ago. He was clever, perhaps too clever, and in his duties he came into possession of much that was private. He swore vengeance when I cast him off. I had thought him incapable of more than idle threats, but now I cannot help but suspect his hand. Ah! Holmes exclaimed softly, his eyes brightening. Now we advance. A discharged secretary with both motive and knowledge, an adversary of precisely the type who might endeavour to ruin you. Tell me, what of his appearance? Did he bear any resemblance to you? Not the slightest, Sir Reginald replied. We were of different stature, colouring, and manner. It is unthinkable that he could pass for me to the casual eye, let alone convince those who know me well. Unthinkable, perhaps, Holmes mused, but not impossible. We must allow for artifice beyond the ordinary. And this Redgrave, where might he be found? I have heard rumours he took lodgings near the docks, but I cannot say with certainty. He was a man of shifting habits. Holmes rose suddenly, his whole demeanour quickening with that restless energy which signalled the thrill of a new chase. Watson, this grows most interesting. Here we have the outlines of a conspiracy most uncommon. Sir Reginald, you will kindly furnish me with the fullest particulars of this man. His habits, his acquaintances, every scrap of knowledge you possess. Meanwhile, we shall pay a discreet visit to Lord Hensworth tomorrow, and thereafter to Miss Vance, to ascertain first-hand the impressions your double conveyed. Only by comparing the accounts of those who witnessed him may we discern the true method of his imposture. Sir Reginald inclined his head in gratitude, though his expression remained drawn with worry. I place myself entirely in your hands, Mr. Holmes. If any man can unravel this devilry, it is you. Holmes gave a curt nod. Then rest assured, sir, the truth shall be brought to light. For my part, I have seldom encountered a case with such peculiar promise. As our visitor departed into the fog-bound night, I could not suppress a shiver. The notion of a man who could so convincingly usurp another's life struck me with an unease I had seldom known. even in the most perilous of our adventures. Holmes, however, seemed enlivened, his eyes alight with that peculiar fire which only the scent of a mystery could kindle. "Watson," he said quietly as the door closed, "we are not merely pursuing a masquerader. We are on the track of a mind that delights in deception, a mind bold enough to challenge the very essence of identity itself. There is more here than a simple act of vengeance, I can feel it. Tomorrow we begin in earnest," and with that, he resumed his place by the fire, steepling his fingers once more, while I sat in silence, pondering the strange case of the double-faced stranger and the dark revelations that surely awaited us. Would you like me to continue with Part 3, Early Investigation, where Holmes and Watson visit Lord Hensworth to collect the first direct witness testimony? Or should I extend this section further, with Holmes's late-night deductions and Watson's reflections before the next day's investigation? The following morning broke with that grey and dismal light peculiar to London in November, when the fog seems to seep not only into the streets, but into the very marrow of one's bones. I found Holmes already astir when I entered our sitting room, his lean figure bent over a scatter of notes and scraps of paper upon the table. A small lamp still glowed beside him, for the daylight had scarcely penetrated the mist beyond our windows. It was evident that he had been engaged in reflection since the hour our visitor departed. "You are early at your work," I remarked, drawing my chair toward the fire. Holmes glanced up with a brief nod. "Sleep is an indulgence I can ill afford when confronted with so singular a matter. I have reviewed Sir Reginald's account, weighed it against the probabilities, and find myself convinced of two things. First, that the man Redgrave is very likely implicated. Second, that we must not, even for an instant, accept the obvious explanation." I smiled faintly. "Which is, of course, that Redgrave has disguised himself and employed his knowledge of Sir Reginald's private affairs." "Precisely. That is the conclusion any policeman would reach, and it may in the end prove accurate. Yet it is my habit never to embrace the common hypothesis until every other has been considered and tested. Men are deceived less often by what is improbable than by what seems plain to the point of simplicity." At that moment, Mrs. Hudson entered to announce that our cab awaited us below. Holmes had arranged the visit to Lord Hensworth for the morning hour, desiring, as he put it, to catch the man of rank before luncheon distracts him into politics. He thrust his notes into his pocket, and together we descended into the clammy fog. Our destination lay in Mayfair, where Lord Hensworth maintained a town residence of some antiquity. We were shown into a drawing-room of considerable elegance, though the atmosphere of the household bore a certain tension, as though the late outrage had unsettled even the servants. Presently Lord Hensworth himself entered, a tall, austere figure with silvered hair and an expression that betrayed more indignation than fear. "Mr. Holmes," he began without ceremony, "I trust you will waste no time. I have made my statement to the police and shall not repeat myself unduly." Holmes inclined his head with that easy courtesy which masked his keenness. "I would not trouble you, my lord, save that clarity often emerges through the repetition of essentials. Pray recount for Dr. Watson here the circumstances of the night in question." Lord Hensworth's lips compressed, but he obliged. "It was shortly after 10 when the fellow entered my chambers. He came cloaked, but his bearing was unmistakable, and when he spoke there was no doubt left. It was Sir Reginald Harrington himself who stood before me, though his features were partly hidden. He demanded certain papers, confidential documents of a political nature. I refused. He struck me across the temple, seized what he could from my desk and fled. My butler pursued, but the scoundrel slipped into the fog." Holmes leaned forward. "You say his features were partly hidden. How then did you recognize him so surely?" "The voice, sir?" "The manner, the arrogance with which he carried himself. I have dined with Sir Reginald on many occasions. A man's voice, his inflections, are not so easily counterfeited. I would swear before any court that it was he." Holmes's fingers drummed lightly upon the arm of his chair. "And the papers he seized, what was their nature?" Lord Hensworth hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "I fear I cannot disclose their contents. They bear upon affairs of state. Suffice it to say they are of no value save to one who sought to embarrass me politically. They were, however, of a confidential order, and their disappearance is most vexing." Holmes's gaze flickered for an instant, but he pressed the matter no further. Instead, he turned toward the butler, who had been summoned to corroborate his master's tale. The man's testimony was clear and unwavering. The intruder had spoken in Sir Reginald's voice, carried himself with his peculiar bearing, and vanished into the fog with a swiftness beyond the servant's pursuit. When we had taken our leave, Holmes walked beside me in silence until our cab bore us into the Strand. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he leaned forward. "Remarkable, Watson. Did you note it? Not the certainty, but the very excess of certainty. A witness too sure is a danger to truth. Voice, manner, bearing. These are things most susceptible to deception, yet they are the very grounds upon which Hensworth rests his oath. You think, then, he may be mistaken?" "I think, my dear fellow, that he has been made to believe more firmly than reason permits. Whether through artifice, contrivance, or his own prejudices, he has accepted a counterfeit as the genuine article. The butler's testimony is but an echo of his master's conviction. I could not deny the force of his words, yet I felt the ground slipping beneath me. But Holmes, the theft of the papers, does that not point to some purpose beyond mere impersonation? Surely Redgrave, if it was he, might sell such documents to the highest bidder." Holmes gave a thin smile. "True enough. Yet recall that our baronet's lady acquaintance, Miss Vance, was also accosted. No political motive there. No, Watson, we confront not one design but two interwoven. The theft may be a diversion, the blackmail attempt the true object, or the reverse. It is the union of the two that renders the case most singular." By midday we had arrived at the residence of Miss Eleanor Vance, a modest but tasteful house not far from Grosvenor Square. The lady herself received us in a small morning room, her manner composed but her eyes betraying a trace of distress. She was young, fair, and possessed of a gentle dignity that impressed me at once. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, "I can scarce speak of the outrage without trembling. I was returning from the opera, attended only by my maid, when a man stepped from the shadows. I recognized him instantly. It was Sir Reginald. He addressed me by name, referred to matters known only to him and myself, and—" her voice faltered. "He threatened to expose those matters, unless I acceded to his demands. I fled, and my maid swears it was indeed Sir Reginald who pursued us a short distance before vanishing." Holmes regarded her keenly. "Madam, forgive me, but accuracy is vital. You say he spoke of matters known only to yourself and Sir Reginald. Are you certain that no other, no servant, no secretary might have been privy to such confidences?" She hesitated. I cannot swear to it. But they were of a personal nature, Mr. Holmes, such as I should never have dreamed of any other repeating." Holmes inclined his head gravely. "Your testimony is most valuable. Tell me, did anything in his manner seem strange? Any gesture, tone, or expression that struck you as uncharacteristic?" She frowned, searching her memory. "Only this, his eyes. They seemed harder than I recalled, colder, as though some cruelty lurked behind them. Yet his voice, his figure, his very bearing were all Sir Reginald's." Holmes thanked her and rose. As we departed, he whispered to me, "Note that, Watson, the eyes. A small divergence amid the sea of similarity. It is in such cracks that truth most often reveals itself." We stepped once more into the chill fog, and Holmes pulled his cloak tightly about him. Two witnesses, both unwavering in their certainty, yet both describing not a man but a performance of a man. I tell you, Watson, we are dealing with an artifice most subtle. I shall not name it yet, for the soil is not ripe. But tonight I would have you accompany me to the docks. If Redgrave is our phantom, he shall not remain hidden long." And with that he hailed a cab, his eyes glittering with that fierce anticipation which told me that the chase had truly begun. That evening found us threading our way through the labyrinthine alleys which ran down toward the Thames, where the fog lay thickest and the reek of tar. Brine and stale smoke clung heavily in the air. Holmes had chosen the hour with precision, insisting that twilight was the time when men of dubious character were most easily observed, neither hidden by full darkness nor constrained by daylight respectability. He strode with that peculiar energy which seized him upon the scent of mystery, his long strides forcing me at times to hasten in order to keep pace. "You will observe, Watson," he said in a low voice, "that the very environment here is conducive to concealment. If Redgrave has indeed taken up lodgings near the docks, it is not merely convenience, but strategy. A man may vanish into these warrens as readily as smoke into the fog. Keep your eyes open, and do not be deceived by what seems obvious. The impostor we seek thrives upon appearances. We turned into a narrow passage, where flickering lamps cast uncertain halos upon the damp cobbles. At length, Holmes halted before a weather-beaten public house, its windows grimy, its signboard swaying upon rusted chains. The murmur of rough voices within mingled with the clatter of mugs. Holmes pushed open the door, and the warm fug of ale, pipe smoke, and unwashed clothing enveloped us. He moved without hesitation to the bar, where a surly landlord eyed us with suspicion. "2 brandies," Holmes ordered, his voice carrying the careless ease of a man accustomed to the place. When the drinks were brought, he leaned closer to the fellow and spoke in a tone too low for me to catch. A few coins passed hands, and the landlord's demeanor softened. Presently he jerked his head toward a dark corner where a solitary figure sat hunched over a mug. Holmes touched my elbow lightly. "There sits our quarry, Watson. Charles Redgrave." I studied the man with interest. He was of middle stature, wiry, with a pale, pinched face partially obscured by unkempt hair. His clothes were of decent cut but ill-kept, as though once belonging to a better station. He sat with his shoulders drawn in, but there was an alertness in his posture, a quick, darting glance in his eyes that spoke of both cunning and unease. Holmes approached him directly, drawing out a chair without so much as a word of permission. "Good evening, Redgrave," he said softly, his grey eyes fixed upon the man. "It is a curious thing to find you here when so many in London would give much to know your whereabouts." The man's hand trembled slightly as he set down his mug, but his lips curved into a sardonic smile. "You mistake me, sir. My name is Harrow, not Redgrave." "You are speaking to the wrong man." Holmes's smile was thinner still. "Indeed? Then it is most singular that you should bear the very scar above the right brow, which Sir Reginald's former secretary received in a hunting accident. A scar, I note, which is imperfectly concealed beneath that tangle of hair. Do not waste your breath upon falsehoods, Mr. Redgrave. They are a poor currency where I am concerned." Redgrave's expression hardened, and for an instant he seemed poised to rise, but Holmes's gaze held him with an almost physical force. At last the man sank back with a muttered oath. "Very well. What is it you want with me? If you have come on behalf of Harrington, you may tell him I have no more dealings with him. He cast me off like a dog, and I owe him nothing." Holmes folded his long hands upon the table. "On the contrary, you owe him much, perhaps his very reputation. It is in peril of ruin by a man who has assumed his likeness, his voice, his very identity. You are, by your history and knowledge, a natural suspect. I would hear from your own lips whether the charge is just." Redgrave gave a low laugh, bitter and mocking. "So he believes it is I who walk in his shoes. A clever fancy, but I have not the face nor the patience for such masquerade. I have grievances, yes, but I am no actor. Let the fine baronet look elsewhere for his phantom." Holmes regarded him keenly. "And yet you admit you bear grievance. You were privy to his affairs, his confidences, his private matters. Information of the very sort which has been employed by this impostor." The man's eyes flickered with something, fear, resentment, or both. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "If another has taken to playing Harrington's double, it is no work of mine. But mark this, Mr. Holmes. There are circles in this city where such things are possible. Men skilled in mimicry, in artifice, in trickery of the stage. I know of one who boasted he could deceive a man's own wife if given the chance. Perhaps your double-faced stranger has drawn upon such talent." Holmes' expression sharpened, though he betrayed no surprise. "A most intriguing suggestion. And what name does this master of mimicry bear?" Redgrave shook his head. "I dare not say. I have no wish to cross him. Enough that he exists, and that there are men who pay dearly for his services." Holmes's fingers tapped lightly upon the table. "Then you have said more than you intended, Redgrave, and I thank you for it. Should I require further particulars, I shall know where to find you. For your own sake, I advise you keep yourself within bounds, lest Scotland Yard take an interest in your affairs." He rose, and I followed, leaving Redgrave glaring into his mug. Once outside, Holmes drew a deep breath of the fog-laden air, his features alight with the glow of discovery. "Watson, we are upon firmer ground. The idea of a professional imitator, an actor skilled in manner and voice, fits our puzzle precisely. It explains the certainty of the witnesses, the intimate knowledge conveyed, and the persistence of the illusion. Mark me, this is no common blackguard, but a craftsman of deception. If I can but trace this shadowy performer, We shall strip the mask from our double-faced stranger. As we made our way back toward Baker Street, I could not suppress the unease that lingered in my breast. The notion of a man who could so utterly inhabit another's identity seemed more sinister with each step. Holmes, however, strode briskly beside me, his mind already racing ahead, weaving deductions into a web whose shape I could not yet discern. "Tomorrow, Watson," he said at last, his voice low but charged with energy, "we begin a search not among criminals but among actors, for it is on the stage, not in the alley, that the secret of this imposture was first rehearsed." The following day dawned no brighter than the last, the fog still hanging over London like a damp curtain, muffling every sound and dimming the very daylight itself. Holmes was in one of his most restless moods, pacing the length of our sitting room with long, rapid strides, his dressing gown flaring about his thin figure as he muttered fragments of thought under his breath. The clue dropped by Redgrave the night before had stirred his faculties into a fever of concentration, and I knew from experience that he would not rest until he had pursued it to its logical conclusion. "Consider it. Watson," he said suddenly, halting by the window and turning to face me, "an impersonator of consummate skill, one who can not only adopt the voice and bearing of Sir Reginald, but even reproduce his most private confidences. That argues more than mere observation. It argues access, study, perhaps even collusion. Where might such a man be trained to deceive the eye and ear alike? The theatre, of course, where illusion is daily currency and deception is art." "You believe, then," I said, "that our impostor is an actor?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Not merely an actor, but one of rare ability, and I mean to discover him. There are but a handful in London capable of such feats. We must make inquiry at those establishments where mimicry is prized and where talent is often found in disreputable company." Without further delay, he summoned a cab, and soon we were rolling through the fog-choked streets toward the Strand, where the theatres loomed dimly behind their painted facades. Our first call was at a dingy little playhouse, more tavern than theatre, where performers of lesser renown plied their trade. Holmes spoke briefly with the manager, a stout fellow with a florid complexion, and slipped him a coin. "Mimics, you say?" the man repeated, scratching his head. "Well, there's young Cartwright. Does a fair impression of Gladstone if you squint a bit. And then there's Mortimer Blake. Now there's a chap with a gift. He can take off any gentleman after 5 minutes' study. Creepy, some call it, but I've not seen him for weeks. Heard he left our stage for more lucrative engagements. Private entertainments, perhaps. Wouldn't surprise me. He had the look of a man not overburdened with scruples." Holmes's expression remained unreadable, but I saw the spark of interest flash in his eye. "This Mortimer Blake, can you tell me where he lodges?" The manager hesitated, then shrugged. "Try the rooms off Drury Lane, a lodging house kept by Mrs. Keating. He used to live there, though whether he still does I cannot say." We thanked the man and departed. Holmes was silent during our short drive to Drury Lane, his eyes fixed upon some point beyond the cab window. At last he said, "Watson, do you recall Miss Vance's remark concerning the impostor's eyes? She spoke of a cruelty, a hardness foreign to Sir Reginald's true nature. That detail aligns precisely with the temperament of a stage mimic who delights in caricature. It is not enough to reproduce a man. Such fellows must embellish, exaggerate, infuse their performance with their own color. That hardness may be the single thread that betrays our actor. The lodging house proved a dreary establishment, its narrow stairway reeking of damp and cabbage. Mrs. Keating, a pinched woman with sharp eyes, regarded us with suspicion until Holmes, in his most ingratiating manner, explained that he was searching for an old acquaintance. "Mr. Blake?" she said at last, lowering her voice as though fearful of being overheard. "A queer tenant, that one. Paid regular enough, but came and went at odd hours. Always practicing voices, he was. Set my nerves on edge, hearing different gentlemen calling out from his room when I knew well he was alone. He left a fortnight past, in the company of another gentleman. Tall, well-dressed, aristocratic sort. Didn't give his name. They went off together in a cab, and Mr. Blake never came back." Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did this companion bear any resemblance to Sir Reginald Farrington?" Mrs. Keating's brows rose. "Now that you mention it, yes. I thought at first it was Sir Reginald himself, for I've seen him pass in his carriage. But there was something different, colder, if you take my meaning. Still, the likeness was striking." Holmes exchanged a swift glance with me, and I saw the significance he attached to the woman's words. "You have been most helpful, madam," he said, pressing a coin into her hand. "Should Mr. Blake return, I beg you to send word to Baker Street at once." Once outside, Holmes drew his cloak tightly about him and spoke in a low, quick tone. "The net tightens, Watson. Our impostor has secured the services of Blake, or perhaps Blake himself plays the part with another guiding hand. But mark this, Mrs. Keating saw a double of Sir Reginald. That confirms beyond doubt the existence of the counterfeit. The question now is not whether he exists, but what his ultimate purpose may be. Theft, blackmail, yes, but I sense a scheme yet larger, more perilous. We must be swift, for each hour may bring fresh ruin upon our client." We returned to Baker Street as the lamps were being lit in the gathering dusk. Holmes flung himself into his chair, eyes glittering with that restless brilliance which to me was always half awe, half unease. He seized his violin and drew from it a series of sharp, discordant notes, as though the very strings might yield him the truth he sought. Then, abruptly laying the instrument aside, he turned to me. "Watson, tonight we shall keep vigil. I have written to Sir Reginald, urging him to remain within his home under guard. If the impostor strikes again, it will be elsewhere, for the game demands fresh scenes and fresh witnesses. We must anticipate his next move, and I have a suspicion, yes, a strong suspicion, that he will not be able to resist another performance very soon." He leaned back, steepling his fingers, his gaze fixed upon the ceiling. The fire cast flickering shadows across his sharp features, and I felt in that moment the full weight of the enigma pressing upon us. Somewhere in the fog of London moved a man who was and was not, Sir Reginald Harrington, a phantom of flesh and blood, weaving deception with every step. What end he sought I could not tell, but in Holmes's eyes I saw both the danger and the challenge, and I knew that the night ahead would bring us closer to the heart of the mystery. Holmes was not mistaken in his prediction, for the following evening brought precisely the development he had anticipated. A messenger arrived at Baker Street just after supper, breathless and agitated, carrying a note that bore the unmistakable crest of the Harrington family. Holmes tore it open with quick fingers and read aloud. "My dear Mr. Holmes, despite your injunction to remain indoors, I felt compelled to attend a private gathering at Lord Havisham's residence tonight. To my astonishment, I was told by several guests that I had already arrived an hour earlier, and that I was even then engaged in conversation in the drawing-room. I swear to you that I had not set foot in the place until the moment of my arrival. This dreadful trickery grows intolerable. I beg you, come at once, for I fear my very identity is being stolen before my eyes. Reginald Harrington." Holmes sprang to his feet with an energy that electrified the room. "The impostor grows reckless, Watson. He could not resist the lure of a more illustrious stage, the salon of Lord Havisham, with its flock of gossiping witnesses. Quick, man, we must be off before the curtain falls upon this performance." Within minutes, we were rattling through the lamplit streets in a cab, Holmes sitting rigid and silent, his eyes burning with that peculiar intensity that signaled his mind working at its highest pitch. I ventured to ask what he expected to find, but he merely raised a hand. "No conjecture until we arrive. Observation first, Watson. Always observation." Lord Havisham's residence stood grand and glittering, its windows ablaze with light and the muffled hum of voices spilling into the night air. We entered by the main hall, Holmes producing the note from Sir Reginald as a kind of passport, past the butler's sceptical eye. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with whispers and sidelong glances. A group of guests huddled near the staircase, their faces animated with the excitement of scandal. "There he is," one whispered as we passed. "Two of them, I swear it. One upstairs, the other just gone into the library." Holmes seized upon the words instantly, turning to me with a gleam. "Two sightings, Watson. Our opportunity is at hand. You take the library. I shall ascend to the drawing-room. Move swiftly and discreetly. If you encounter the impostor, observe closely, but do not confront him until I arrive." With that, he vanished up the staircase, leaving me with the pounding of my own heart and the weight of his instructions. I pressed through the throng and made my way to the library, a richly furnished chamber lined with tall shelves and dimly lit by a single chandelier. There by the hearth stood a figure that made my blood run cold. It was Sir Reginald, or so I thought at first glance. The same upright carriage, the same aquiline nose, the same distinguished whiskers. But when he turned toward me, I caught in his eyes a glint of something sharp, mocking, and altogether sinister. It was the cruelty Miss Vance had spoken of, and it confirmed in an instant that I was face to face with the counterfeit. He smiled faintly, as if recognizing me, and raised his glass in a gesture of ironic courtesy. "Dr. Watson, I presume. Convey my compliments to your friend, Mr. Holmes. Tell him the performance is nearly perfected." Before I could muster a reply, he slipped through a side door with such swiftness that I was momentarily stunned. I gave chase, but the corridor beyond was already empty, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the great house. At that moment, Holmes appeared at the far end, his expression taut with urgency. "You saw him?" he demanded. "I did, and he knew me, Holmes. He spoke of you as though daring us to pursue him." Holmes' eyes flashed. "Then we are dealing with a foe who is not merely deceptive, but bold, dangerously bold. He has laid his challenge at our feet. Come, we must not lose the scent." We hurried into the street, but by then the impostor had vanished into the fog, leaving behind only the faint impression of his presence, as though the night itself had swallowed him. Holmes stood motionless for a moment, scanning the mist with hawk-like intensity. Then he drew a deep breath and turned to me. "He has revealed more than he intended, Watson. Mark this, he acknowledged you by name. That means he has studied not only Sir Reginald, but his entire circle. He knows us, perhaps even anticipated our movements. We are not hunting a mere mimic. We are contending with a strategist, one who plays a long game." "And what game is that?" I asked. Holmes's lips curved into the faintest of smiles, though his eyes remained grave. "That, my dear fellow, is what we must unravel before the final act is upon us. Come, we return to Baker Street. There is a pattern here, hidden among the shadows, and I intend to drag it into the light before this masquerade turns to tragedy." We climbed back into the cab, the wheels clattering over the cobblestones as London's fog thickened around us. I could not shake the image of the impostor's mocking eyes, nor the certainty that he was even now watching, waiting, preparing his next move. And in Holmes's silence beside me, I felt the gathering storm of a mind racing toward revelation. Holmes remained uncharacteristically silent during our return journey, his long fingers drumming a restless tattoo upon his knee. His gaze fixed not upon me, but upon some invisible arrangement of facts spread before his mind's eye. I knew enough not to disturb his reflections, for in those moments his intellect moved in channels far too swift for my own comprehension. It was only as we neared Baker Street that he at last stirred, his lips parting with sudden decisiveness. "Watson, we are faced with no ordinary charlatan. Tonight's exhibition was no accident of opportunity." He knew Harrington would attend Havisham's gathering, and he calculated that word of his double appearance would spread with the speed of wildfire through London society. "This is not mimicry for amusement. It is a campaign of destruction aimed directly at Sir Reginald's reputation." I could not but agree. But what man could so perfectly replicate him? Even I, who had only a passing acquaintance with the baronet, was deceived at first glance. The resemblance was uncanny. Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the sharpness of deduction. "Not resemblance, Watson, manufacture. Tonight I had the chance to observe the counterfeit upstairs in the drawing-room, though only briefly. His whiskers were applied, not grown. His gait bore the stiffness of conscious imitation rather than the ease of habit. And though his voice was pitched admirably close to the original, there was an occasional slip of intonation, too theatrical by half. "Then we are dealing with an actor?" I exclaimed. "Most assuredly," Holmes replied, "and a talented one. But no mere stage player could sustain such a performance without motive. Consider, Sir Reginald is not a man of idle consequence. He sits upon certain committees, controls not insignificant sums, and has recently advanced positions which, if adopted, might alter the flow of influence among several powerful cliques. To destroy such a man socially is to weaken his political standing. We must ask ourselves who benefits from that ruin." Holmes's mind was in full command of the case. He lit his pipe and stood before the fire, speaking as much to himself as to me. "The impostor reveals himself boldly in public, Watson. That means he is confident that exposure will not lead to capture, or that capture is of no concern to him. Yet such confidence suggests an organization behind him, for no single man could hope to sustain so elaborate a masquerade unaided." "A network, then? possibly even a conspiracy. I shivered at the thought, for there was a gravity in Holmes's tone that bespoke true danger. The following morning, Sir Reginald himself appeared at Baker Street once more. His features bore the strain of sleepless hours, and the proud composure he had first shown us had given way to visible agitation. "Mr. Holmes," he said hoarsely, "they speak of me in every club and drawing-room as a madman or a criminal. Twice yesterday I was accosted in the street by men demanding repayment of debts I never contracted. And now this very morning comes word that a young lady of respectable family has received compromising letters signed with my hand. I swear to you I never penned a line of them. If this continues, I shall be undone." Holmes motioned him to a chair and regarded him with grave intensity. "Sir Reginald, rest assured that the truth shall be uncovered, but you must give me your full confidence. Who stands to profit most by your disgrace?" The baronet hesitated, his gaze flickering uneasily. "There are rivals, of course. Lord Darnley has long opposed me in Parliament, yet I cannot conceive of him descending to such vile trickery. And then—" He broke off suddenly, his hands clenching upon his knees. "Speak freely, sir," Holmes urged. "Every hesitation is an impediment to the pursuit of truth. There was once," Sir Reginald continued in a lower tone, "a man who bore me great malice. An actor, Edmund Blackwell by name. I dismissed him from a charitable committee some years ago when his conduct was found to be fraudulent. He swore vengeance upon me in the presence of witnesses. I had thought him gone from London, perhaps even dead, for I heard no more of him. But—" His voice faltered, Holmes's eyes glittered like steel. "Blackwell, a name I know well. A mimic of uncanny skill, though ever too fond of intrigue. Yes, Watson, the threads begin to weave themselves into a pattern. At this revelation my heart quickened. The mysterious double, the bold imposture, the deliberate ruin of a man's reputation, it all fell into place under the sinister shadow of this Blackwell. And yet, as Holmes's expression betrayed, there remained unanswered questions. Why reveal himself so openly? Who supported his schemes, and to what ultimate end? Holmes tapped his pipe against the mantel with sharp emphasis. "Sir Reginald, you must do precisely as I say. Withdraw from public view for the present. Announce, if need be, some trifling illness that confines you. Let your double strut upon the stage unchecked, for the longer he plays the part, the more certain his undoing. Watson and I shall see to it." Sir Reginald rose, visibly relieved by Holmes's steady assurance, though still heavy with doubt. As he departed, Holmes turned to me with a look of fierce determination. "We have drawn our adversary into the open, Watson. Blackwell thrives upon deception, but every mask leaves seams, every imitation a flaw. It is only a matter of detecting the crack in his performance. When that moment arrives, we shall strip away his false face before all London." And with those words, Holmes seated himself once more, his lean form tense with the anticipation of the battle ahead, while I felt the ominous weight of the struggle that was yet to come. Holmes wasted no time in setting his plan into motion. As soon as Sir Reginald departed, he took up his chemical table, rummaging through vials and bottles while muttering to himself, "Blackwell thrives upon deception, but the stage he now occupies is no longer the theatre. It is London itself. To maintain such a performance, Watson, he must draw upon a network of confidants, costumiers, and go-betweens. We shall find them by smoke rather than fire." I watched in puzzlement as he began preparing a peculiar concoction in a small glass flask, mixing powders with a practiced hand. The liquid turned a pale green before emitting a faint vapor. "And what purpose does this serve?" I asked. Holmes smiled faintly. "An experiment in distraction, my dear fellow. I propose to pay a call this very evening at the theatrical lodgings of one Mr. Charles Lyndon, a costumer of no small reputation. He has long provided disguises to the stage, and I would wager that our Blackwell has drawn upon his talents. No sudden demonstration of chemistry tends to loosen tongues. That night we set out into the fog-drenched streets, our hansom clattering along until we reached a narrow byway near Covent Garden, where the gas lamps burned dimly and the air reeked of stale spirits. Lyndon's shop was tucked between a pawnbroker's and a music hall, its windows cluttered with wigs, masks, and garments of every hue. Holmes pushed open the door without hesitation, and we were greeted by the sight of Lyndon himself, a stout fellow with a florid complexion and a nervous twitch about the eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Lyndon," Holmes said smoothly. "You do not know me, but I know you. A craftsman of great ingenuity, whose work has adorned many a performance. Might I trouble you for a few moments of conversation?" Linden's unease deepened at once. "I am but a tradesman, sir. If you are in want of costume, you will find what you seek in the catalogue." Holmes drew from his pocket a small phial, uncorked it, and allowed a faint green vapour to curl upward before quickly replacing the stopper. Linden stepped back with alarm. "No fear, my good man, it is harmless," Holmes assured him, though the intensity in his gaze belied the casual tone. "But it demonstrates the ease with which a man of science might expose the traces of theatrical gum upon a false beard, or the powder used to alter complexion. You see, deceit leaves residue, and residue leaves proof." Linden's face drained of colour. He fumbled with a handkerchief, wiping at his brow. "Sir, I dare not—" Holmes leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We seek not to harm you, but to unmask a greater villain. A man who calls himself Reginald Harrington, even as the true baronet sits in misery. Edmund Blackwell, does that name stir your memory?" The costumer's composure collapsed at once. He wrung his hands and cast a furtive glance at the shuttered window. "I had no part in his schemes, I swear it. He came to me, spoke of a private engagement, offered a handsome sum for the finest work I could provide. I supplied wigs, beards, coats, nothing more. It is not my place to question what a client intends." Holmes's eyes glittered, but his voice remained even. "When did he last visit you?" "3 nights ago. He demanded another coat, precisely to Sir Reginald's measure, and a cravat of particular pattern. He left word that I should send them by a boy to a house in Bloomsbury, number 14 in Little Ormond Yard." Holmes noted this swiftly in his pocketbook, then closed the file and tucked it away. "You have done wisely, Mr. Linden. Keep silent of this interview and no harm shall come to you." We left the shop, and once outside in the fog, Holmes turned to me with satisfaction. "You perceive, Watson, how easily the chain tightens. Blackwell cannot maintain his charade without the assistance of tradesmen. By tracing their connections, we trace him. And now we have an address. Little Ormond Yard proved to be a mean and narrow court, its houses shabby and ill-kept, with only a single lamp casting a feeble glow. Number 14 bore no outward sign of occupancy, yet Holmes moved toward it with purposeful strides. Producing a slender tool from his pocket, he deftly manipulated the lock, and in moments we slipped inside. The air within was close and musty, carrying the faint scent of grease paint and stale tobacco. Our table in the center of the room bore scattered remnants of disguise: false whiskers, sticks of grease paint, scraps of cloth, and half-burned candles. In the corner stood a trunk, which Holmes opened to reveal several suits of clothing, each unmistakably cut in the style of Sir Reginald's wardrobe. Holmes bent low, examining the garments with his magnifying lens. "See here, Watson. The cuffs bear traces of a reddish dust, brick dust to be precise. Blackwell must frequent some disused warehouse or building site, for only such places yield this particular residue. We shall follow the dust to its source." At that instant, a faint creak sounded from the upper floor. Holmes motioned for silence, his lean frame tense as a drawn bow. We crept to the stair, every board groaning beneath our weight. As we reached the landing, a shadow flitted across the dim light and a door slammed violently. We rushed forward, but by the time Holmes flung open the door, the room was empty, save for an open casement window swinging in the night air. Holmes strode to the sill, peering into the fog below. "Too late," he muttered, but not fruitless. "He was here, Watson, here but moments ago. He knows now that we are upon him, and that knowledge will drive him into bolder and more desperate play." I felt a chill as we stood in that darkened room, the city's muffled roar beyond, the scent of grease paint clinging to the air. The enemy was close, nearer than ever, yet still beyond our grasp. And in Holmes's keen, restless eyes, I saw both the exhilaration of pursuit and the grim recognition that the game had grown more perilous with every step. Holmes lingered at the window for several moments, his gaze sweeping the fog-laden street below, as though the very patterns of the drifting mist might reveal what human eyes could not. At last he turned from the casement, his expression taut yet composed. "We were within a hair's breadth, Watson." He heard our approach and slipped away. Still, even in flight, men leave behind them the marks of their passage. Let us see what he has neglected in his haste. We set about examining the small chamber with the utmost care. Holmes, crawling upon hands and knees with his lens, paused beside the hearth where a pile of ash still smouldered faintly. With his long fingers, he drew out several fragments of half-burned paper, arranging them delicately upon the table. One bore a scrawl of writing, barely legible where the flames had licked it, but enough to discern a few words. "Tonight, Doc, consignment." Silence. Holmes' eyes lit up. "You perceive, Watson, the significance. Our quarry is not content merely to besmirch a gentleman's honor. He traffics in darker affairs. A dockside consignment smacks of smuggling, perhaps contraband of no mean value. Blackwell has entangled himself in commerce that demands secrecy, and which would profit greatly from the ruin of an incorruptible opponent such as Sir Reginald." As he spoke, he examined further the contents of the hearth. Among the ashes lay a small seal of red wax, impressed with the figure of a coiled serpent. Holmes regarded it with grave attention. "This too is instructive. It is the device of a society I have encountered once before, a fraternity of smugglers who call themselves the Serpent's Coil. Their operations reach from Marseille to the Thames. If Blackwell is in league with them, then this masquerade is but the surface of a deeper plot." I felt the weight of the revelation press upon me, for it was no longer a mere matter of social ruin, but a conspiracy of international breadth. Yet Holmes's manner was calm, almost exhilarated, as he paced the room, assembling the puzzle in his mind. "Come, Watson. The docks must be our next theatre. There, amid the warehouses and fog, we may find the impostor caught in the very act." We departed the house and hailed a cab, the driver urging his horse through the narrow lanes until the air grew raw with the tang of the river. The great pools of shadow cast by the dockside lamps seemed to swallow us whole as we descended. Piles of timber, stacks of barrels, and the black hulks of moored vessels loomed through the mist. The air vibrated faintly with the clang of chains and the low murmur of unseen men at work. Holmes led me unerringly to a narrow alley between two warehouses, where we concealed ourselves behind a stack of crates. From this vantage we observed a curious scene unfolding beneath the pale glow of a single lantern. A group of 5 men stood clustered round a cart, upon which lay several sealed chests. At their centre, giving orders with a voice of commanding assurance, was none other than the double of Sir Reginald Harrington. The resemblance was again astounding. Yet now, forewarned, I perceived the artifice more keenly, the stiffness of the whiskers, the calculated hauteur of the gestures. Holmes pressed a finger to his lips, motioning for silence. Blackwell, or his double, was directing the unloading of the chests. "These must be in the warehouse by midnight," he declared. "The baronet himself takes full responsibility. Should the customs men interfere, you know whom to blame." The words chilled me to the bone. It was a deliberate attempt to place Sir Reginald's name upon smuggling operations that might carry ruinous consequences should they be uncovered. Holmes bent close to my ear, his whisper scarcely audible above the creak of timber and the splash of water against stone. "Observe, Watson. He binds Sir Reginald's identity not only to scandal but to crime. The noose tightens with every word he utters. Yet we must not act rashly. To seize him now without proof beyond disguise would be to risk his release and the triumph of his scheme. No better that we follow him, unravel his network, and catch him with evidence so irrefutable that even the cleverest theatre cannot deny it." I nodded, though my heart burned with indignation as I watched the villain play his part so boldly. At length the men finished their work and dispersed into the night, Blackwell vanishing with them into the fog. Holmes did not stir from our hiding place until the last footfall had faded. Then he straightened, his eyes alight with grim purpose. "Tomorrow, Watson, we summon Inspector Lestrade. This affair has grown too vast for private pursuit alone. With Scotland Yard's net in my own hand to direct it, we shall lay our trap. Blackwell believes himself the author of this drama. We shall see how he enjoys his role when the curtain falls upon him." We returned to Baker Street in silence, the image of that false face still vivid in my mind, and the certainty growing within me that the final confrontation was drawing swiftly nearer. The following morning broke grey and raw, the fog hanging low over Baker Street, as though London itself conspired to hide the secrets Holmes pursued. He had scarcely touched his breakfast pacing instead before the hearth with the restless energy of a hound straining at the leash. I had grown accustomed to his moods, yet there was a peculiar sharpness to his manner now, as though every fibre of his being was bent upon the capture of Blackwell. At 9:30, Inspector Lestrade arrived, stamping the damp from his boots and looking both harried and sceptical as was his custom. Holmes wasted no time in preamble, but launched straight into the affair, recounting with crisp precision the masquerades, the false appearances, and finally the nocturnal scene at the docks. Lestrade listened with furrowed brow, his scepticism giving way to reluctant concern. "So you mean to tell me," he said at last, "that a disgraced actor has been parading himself as Sir Reginald Farrington, committing all manner of mischief in his name, and now seeks to tie him to a smuggling ring? It's a wild tale, Mr. Holmes, though I'll grant you've been right often enough when matters have sounded wildest." Holmes gave a curt nod. "You may call it wild, Lestrade, but the fragments of proof are already in our possession. The costumer who supplied the disguises, the rented rooms in Little Ormond Yard with their residue of grease paint and false beards, the fragment of paper recovered from the fire, each points with unwavering finger to Edmund Blackwell. What remains is to catch him in the very act of his imposture, with evidence so conclusive that even a magistrate inclined to leniency could not dismiss it." "And how do you propose we do that?" asked Lestrade, though there was a note of grudging respect in his tone. Holmes smiled thinly. "By allowing the man to think himself victorious. He will not abandon his design, for he has invested too much in its success. He will seek to push Sir Reginald's ruin to its conclusion. That, gentlemen, is when we shall be waiting." It was arranged that very day. Sir Reginald, following Holmes's counsel, had withdrawn from public life under the guise of illness. Yet it was decided that notice should reach the clubs and drawing rooms of London that the baronet, against his doctor's advice, intended to attend a forthcoming reception at Lady Tressilian's house, an event of no small prominence. Holmes had no doubt that Blackwell would seize upon the opportunity to appear in Sir Reginald's stead, weaving fresh scandal before half the aristocracy of the city. During the days that followed, Holmes was tireless. He arranged with Lestrade for plainclothesmen to mingle among the guests, posted others near the exits, and prepared with his own hand a disguise so convincing that even I, accustomed to his transformations, scarcely recognized him. He would attend the reception not as Sherlock Holmes, but as a minor servant, silent and watchful in a corner, while I was to remain near the baronet himself. The night of the reception arrived, and Lady Tressilian's grand house was ablaze with light and thronged with guests. The air within hummed with talk and laughter, though beneath the glittering surface I sensed the taut thread of Holmes's plan drawn tight. Sir Reginald, pale but resolute, entered on my arm, and at once I felt the stir among the company. Whispers rose, heads turned, fans fluttered, for scarcely had the true baronet appeared when a second voice was heard at the far end of the hall, announcing with great formality, "Sir Reginald Farrington." There he stood, the impostor, bold as brass, in every detail a mirror of the man at my side. The room erupted in confusion, ladies gasping, gentlemen exclaiming, the double bowing with theatrical grace as though relishing the scandal he had unleashed. For a moment even I felt the strangeness of the spectacle, as though the two were indeed twin brothers, rather than counterfeit and original. Yet Holmes had foreseen it all. From his vantage near the servants' door, he gave a scarcely perceptible signal. Instantly Lestrade and his men began to close in, though with deliberate subtlety, allowing the drama to unfold. Blackwell, mistaking their composure for hesitation, grew more daring. He strode towards Sir Reginald, his voice ringing out for all to hear. "Behold, ladies and gentlemen, the impostor who dares claim my name. This fellow is no more Reginald Farrington than I am. Shall we allow such fraud to persist unchallenged?" A murmur rippled through the crowd, the shock of divided appearances leaving many bewildered. But before further tumult could ensue, Holmes stepped forward, shedding his servant's guise with one swift movement, his keen eyes flashing in the lamplight. "You overreach yourself." "Blackwell," he said, his voice cutting through the din like a blade, "the play is ended. You have strutted upon the stage long enough. It is time the mask was torn away." For an instant Blackwell faltered, his eyes narrowing as he recognized his adversary. Then with sudden ferocity, he turned as if to flee, but Lestrade's men were already upon him, seizing his arms in an iron grip. The room erupted in cries and exclamations as the false baronet struggled vainly against his captors. Holmes stepped closer, and with a single deft motion stripped the false whiskers from Blackwell's face, revealing the features beneath, haggard, bitter, yet unmistakably his own. A collective gasp swept the room, and all eyes turned upon the unmasked deceiver. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holmes declared, "permit me to present not Sir Reginald Farrington, but Edmund Blackwell, sometime actor and full-time scoundrel, whose villainy would have ruined an honourable man had not Providence and reason intervened." The uproar that followed was immense, yet in the midst of it all I saw Sir Reginald's shoulders lift as though a crushing burden had been lifted from them. He grasped Holmes's hand with fervent gratitude, though Holmes, as ever, received the thanks with a modest inclination of his head. Blackwell, snarling in defeat, was led away under heavy guard. Yet Holmes's eyes were not on the prisoner, but on the fragments of paper he had taken earlier from the fire, which he now pressed into Lestrade's hand. "See to it that the warehouses on the docks are searched at once. There lies the true heart of his enterprise, and you will find contraband enough to seal his fate beyond question." Lestrade, though reluctant to show admiration, could not hide the respect in his voice. "Mr. Holmes, you've done it again. Scotland Yard will see this through, you may depend upon it." Holmes gave only the faintest smile. "It is not the triumph of one man, Lestrade, but of observation and reason. The play is concluded, but its lessons endure." And with that he turned to me, his eyes already distant, as though some new problem were taking shape in the recesses of his formidable mind. While I marvelled yet again at the extraordinary theatre in which my friend made the world his stage. The following morning found us once more in the familiar comfort of Baker Street, the fog outside lifting to reveal a crisp, clear sky, as though London itself had chosen to breathe easier now that the impostor's schemes were undone. Sir Reginald had taken his leave the evening before, his gratitude almost overwhelming in its fervour, yet Holmes had received it with his customary indifference, retreating almost immediately into his violin and the solace of a solitary pipe. It was only now, as I sat opposite him at breakfast, that he condescended to offer his final explanation. "You see, Watson," he began, his tone as composed as if we were speaking of some minor inconvenience, rather than a case that had threatened an innocent man's entire reputation. "Blackwell's genius lay not in invention, but in mimicry. His life upon the stage had trained him to observe the subtlest gesture, the smallest peculiarity of tone, and reproduce them with unnerving precision. Yet he was betrayed by that very art, for while a stage audience might applaud a convincing counterfeit, the theatre of life is governed by a sterner critic. Logic," I nodded, recalling the moment when Holmes had produced the charred fragment from the fireplace. "It was the paper, then, that gave you certainty." Indeed, the burnt remnant spoke volumes. The figures scrawled upon it were not a gentleman's idle calculations, but the coded tallies of shipments, contraband cleverly concealed within ordinary cargo. Once I compared the handwriting with a specimen of Blackwell's from his days as an actor, procured, I might add, by a discreet inquiry at the theatre. I knew that the supposed baronet could only be the pretender, that he should have chosen to dispose of the evidence in a lodging-house grate rather than the Thames itself, betrayed his arrogance. Criminals, Watson, almost invariably trip over their own conceit. "And the costumer's testimony?" I asked, merely the corroboration needed to silence doubt. No one but an actor in desperate straits would have commissioned so elaborate a series of disguises, and no one but Blackwell had both the motive and the talent. Once we arranged the reception at Lady Tressilian's, the rest was inevitable. A man like Blackwell cannot resist an audience. Holmes paused, drawing thoughtfully upon his pipe. "It is curious, is it not, how men destroy themselves in pursuit of shadows. Blackwell might have achieved honest distinction had he applied his gifts to the craft of drama. Instead, he turned them to villainy, and is now destined for the gallows, or at best a lifetime behind bars. A double face, Watson. One for the world of art, one for the world of crime, yet neither true." I could not help but reflect upon the irony. "And Sir Reginald?" I asked. "He is restored to his good name, thanks to you." Holmes waved away the notion with impatience. "Restored by the truth, Watson, not by me. I was merely its servant. The facts existed all along. It required only the discipline to read them. Remember that when you record this adventure, my dear fellow, The detective does not conjure miracles. He simply refuses to overlook what others dismiss. His words, as always, held a quiet rebuke, for I knew how readily I attributed to Holmes a kind of sorcery, when, in fact, his brilliance lay in the tireless clarity of his observation. As the clock chimed the hour, Holmes rose and crossed to the window, gazing down at the bustling street below. "I fancy, Watson, that before the week is out some fresh matter will present itself. London never sleeps, and where men are, there too is folly. But for the moment," and here his lips curved in the faintest of smiles, "I shall content myself with a sonata. One cannot always live among masks and shadows." And so he took up his violin, and the first plaintive notes drifted through the sitting room, weaving themselves into the air like a benediction after storm. I set down my pen, already certain that this latest chronicle, the case of the double-faced stranger, would hold its place among the most singular of my friend's triumphs. For once again, Sherlock Holmes had pulled back the veil, and where deception had reigned, truth now stood unmasked.